47 minutes. Well, that's how long I sat on my kitchen floor reading my family's messages about me before I heard my mother's car pull back into my parking lot. 47 minutes to read 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days of conversations I was never supposed to see. 847 messages. My mother's words, my brother's words, my sister-in-law's words. All of them in a group chat that had been running in the background of every holiday, every phone call. Every Sunday dinner, I had shown up to thinking I understood the room I was walking into. The chat was called Family, No Delia. I know the exact moment it started because the first message was sent the morning after I called my mother crying. I had been 23 years old, sitting on the floor of my Charlotte apartment at 11:30 at night, having just found out I had been passed over for a promotion I had worked toward for 14 months. I had called her because she was my mother and I was scared and I didn't know who else to call. She had said all the right things. She had told me I was exactly where I was supposed to be. She had told me to call her anytime, day or night. That's what she was there for. The next morning, she had typed out a word-for-word account of what I had told her and sent it to my brother Kevin, his wife Pam, and my Aunt Terry. Her message ended with, "She gets like this sometimes, just needs to get it out of her system. Don't say anything when you see her." Pam replied with a laughing emoji. Kevin sent a thumbs up. I found out about all of this on a Sunday afternoon in September, 26 years old, sitting on my kitchen floor in the apartment I had built from scratch in a city I had chosen for myself, holding my mother's phone in both hands like it was something I needed to be careful with. Before I tell you what happened at my father's birthday dinner 6 weeks later, if you're watching this for the first time, please subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps more than I can explain. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one without exception. My name is Delia Marsh. I am 26 years old, and I am a digital forensics technician at an insurance investigation firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. My job is to find what people think they have hidden. Deleted texts, wiped drives, conversations people had in private that became relevant to something larger. I recover them. I document them. I have sat across from 3 different judges and explained under oath exactly what I found on someone's device and exactly what it meant. I know what a paper trail looks like. I know what a pattern looks like. I know the difference between someone who made a mistake and someone who built a system. My mother built a system. She had been running it for 3 years before she left her phone on my kitchen counter on a Sunday afternoon, and her screen lit up with a notification from a group chat she had named after my absence. This is the story of what I found in those 47 minutes, what I did with it for 6 weeks, and what happened on the first Saturday in November at my father's birthday dinner when I put my phone on the table and said, "Before you finish that, I want to read something." Let me take you back to before I knew any of this. Because the thing about finding out the truth is that it doesn't just change the present, it reaches backward and changes everything that came before it. And you have to let yourself sit with that before you can understand what any of it meant. I grew up in a suburb of Charlotte called Mint Hill, in a house with a front yard my father mowed with the precision of someone who found it genuinely satisfying, and a back porch my mother had decorated with the same string lights for 15 years. We were not a dramatic family. We did not fight loudly or love loudly. We were the kind of family that ate dinner together most nights and communicated in the specific shorthand of people who have been in a room together long enough to stop finishing their sentences. My father, Ron, had worked in commercial HVAC for 28 years. He was a quiet man in the way that competent people are sometimes quiet, not because he had nothing to say, but because he had learned that most problems yielded to patience and a specific wrench rather than discussion. He called me kid. He had called me that since I was 8, and he has never stopped. He expressed love through logistics, through showing up when a shelf needed hanging, through researching the right coffee maker before I moved into my first apartment, through texting me during bad weather to ask if my car was handling okay. He did not build group chats. He did not manage narratives. He was, as far as I understood, exactly what he appeared to be. My mother, Sandra, was something more complicated. She was warm. I want to say that clearly and mean it, because the complicated version of someone does not cancel the true version of them. And the true version of my mother included a genuine warmth that showed up reliably and without performance. She remembered things. She sent cards for every occasion, not just the major ones. She called on the anniversary of my grandfather's death every year because she knew I had been close with him, and she thought that kind of day should not pass without someone acknowledging it. She was also, for as long as I can remember, the person who decided what the family knew and when, not through cruelty, through architecture. She constructed the way information flowed in our family, the way someone constructs a room, deciding what went where, what was visible, what stayed behind a closed door. She did it so naturally and for so long that it read as personality rather than pattern. And I think most of us had simply learned to navigate around it the way you navigate around furniture that has been in the wrong place for so long. You've stopped seeing it. Kevin was my older brother by 5 years. He was 31, married to Pam, living 20 minutes from my parents in a house they had bought 3 years ago when the market was still reasonable. Kevin was easy in a way I had never been easy. He moved through family dynamics without friction, not because he was oblivious, but because he had learned at some point that I had apparently missed that the cost of friction was higher than the cost of going along. He was a good brother in the ways that were straightforward. He showed up when something needed doing. He texted on birthdays without being reminded. He had also, I would later find out, been a member of a group chat called Family. No Delia for 3 years and had not once sent a message suggesting that this was something I should know about. Pam had come into the family 8 years ago, and within 12 months had become closer to my mother than I had ever been. I had spent a long time examining whether what I felt about that was jealousy, deciding that it partly was, and that the jealousy was understandable, but not particularly useful, and then continuing to feel it anyway at a low, steady frequency that I had mostly learned to ignore. Pam was organized and confident and spoke in a register of cheerful authority that made people feel she'd already decided the best way to do everything and was being generous in explaining it to you. She got along well with my mother. They had the same sense of how a family was supposed to run. I was the one who had left. That was the simplest version of how the family saw me, and also, I think, the version that had shaped everything that came after. I had gone to college in Charlotte, stayed for the career, built something that was mine in a city that wasn't the one I grew up in, and come home for holidays carrying the particular self-consciousness of someone who knows they are being perceived as having chosen ambition over belonging. I had not chosen ambition over belonging. I had simply chosen to go somewhere and build something, which felt from the inside like a reasonable and healthy thing to do, and felt from the outside of my family like a mild, ongoing rejection. My mother never said that directly. She communicated it in the way she communicated most things, through implication and omission and the slight pause before she answered questions about how I was doing, as though she was deciding in real time how much of the real answer to share and with whom. I had spent 3 years in therapy, partly working through the feeling that something was happening in my family that I was not part of. My therapist, a careful woman named Dr. Ames, who had an office in Plaza Midwood and a habit of asking questions that made me feel like I was doing the thinking rather than her, had asked me more than once what evidence I had. I had said it was a feeling. She had said feelings were important, but that I should be careful about building a narrative around a feeling before I'd examined it thoroughly. She was right that I should examine things thoroughly. She was not right that I was building a narrative around nothing. I was 23 the first time I noticed something that didn't fit. I had told my mother about a work conflict, something with a senior analyst who had been taking credit for my documentation work. And 2 weeks later, I was at Sunday dinner, and Kevin made a comment offhand about people who couldn't handle office politics. And my mother changed the subject very slightly too quickly. And I had that feeling I cannot fully describe. The feeling of arriving somewhere a moment after everyone else has left. I was 24 when I told my mother I had started therapy and asked her not to tell the family because I wasn't ready for the conversation. And 3 months later, Pam asked me over Christmas if therapy was helping with the anxiety. And I had no memory of mentioning anxiety to Pam because I had never mentioned anxiety to Pam. I was 25 when I drove home for Thanksgiving and felt the entire weekend like everyone was being warm to me in a way that was slightly more careful than warmth needed to be. Like people who were being kind to someone they had recently discussed. I told Dr. Ames about each of these things. We examined them. We talked about the ways anxiety can shape perception, the ways old family wounds can make you hypervigilant, the ways the mind builds patterns from incomplete information. I was doing all the right things. I was being a thoughtful, self-aware person about something that was actually happening. That is the part of this story I have the most complicated feelings about, that I was so committed to not being the person who made everything about herself so committed to examining my own perception before drawing conclusions, that I gave the situation more benefit of the doubt than it had earned. I have forgiven myself for that. Mostly, I'm still working on the last part. But here is what those 3 years actually look like from the inside, not knowing what I know now. The first Christmas after Pam joined the family, my mother reorganized the gift exchange. Nothing dramatic, just a new system, names drawn from a hat, a spending limit that made practical sense. I drew Kevin's name. Kevin drew mine. We exchanged gifts the way we always had. It felt fine. What I did not know was that in the group chat in the 2 weeks before Christmas, there had been a conversation about whether to include me in the new ornament tradition my mother had started, a personalized ornament for each family member hung on the tree in the front hallway. There had been a brief discussion. Pam had said, "I mean, she's barely here. Does it make sense to make one for her?" My mother had said, "You're right. Let's just keep it to the core family for now." I had noticed it's like that Christmas that everyone had an ornament in the front hallway except me. I had told myself I was imagining the significance of it. A small thing, not worth mentioning. It was not a small thing. And it was the third message in a group chat that was 844 messages from being finished. The summer I was 24, my parents went to Asheville for a long weekend to see my mother's college friend. They had a good time. They came back with stories about the restaurant they'd found and the hiking trail my father had liked. I heard the stories at Sunday dinner 2 weeks later. What I did not know was that my Aunt Terry had also been there. A planned trip, coordinated over the previous month, that had involved Terry driving up from Knoxville and meeting my parents at the hotel. There are photographs. I have seen them now. My mother sent them into the group chat with a message saying, "Don't mention to Delia. She'd want to know why she wasn't invited, and it was just easier this way." I remember asking my mother on that Sunday how Terry was doing. My mother said she hadn't talked to Terry in a while. I accepted that. I accepted so many things because I had decided in therapy that the reasonable response to a feeling was not to act on it, but to examine it. I examined it. I found it wanting. I moved on. I kept showing up. I kept calling on Sundays. I kept sharing things with my mother that I thought were private because she was my mother and I was trying to have a real relationship with her. And that is what a real relationship requires. You have to give the person something true. She gave what I gave her to the group chat within 48 hours, almost every time. I know this now because I sat on my kitchen floor and read all 847 messages. I know the Christmas I wasn't told about and the birthday dinner in June that was framed as just a small thing when I couldn't make it, but which, according to the chat, had 17 people and a catered spread. I know about the conversation in March of the previous year when my mother told the group that I had broken up with someone I had been seeing, information I had shared with her in a phone call 2 days earlier, and Pam had responded, "Ugh, typical. She picks the wrong ones and then acts shocked." I know about message 589. I was talking to Ron, and honestly, he agrees that Delia needs to figure her own life out. He thinks she's too dependent on us emotionally, and she needs to grow up. My father's name, my father's voice, a sentence my father had never spoken. I read that message 4 times on my kitchen floor. I looked at the timestamp. I looked at the responses. Kevin had sent a single word. Yeah. Pam had sent, "Someone needed to say it honestly." Terry had sent nothing, which I noted. I thought about every conversation I had had with my father in the past 14 months. Every time I had called him, every time he had called me, every practical question, and every "that's tough, kid," and every text about whether my car was handling okay in the rain. He had never once in any of those conversations said anything that sounded like that message. Not the content, not the tone, not the framing, not the vocabulary. My father did not say things like "too dependent" emotionally. My father said things like, "So what's the plan? And do you need me to come down there?" I sat with that message for a long time. Then I kept reading. I read until I had read everything there was to read. I read until my mother's car turned into my parking lot and her headlights swept across my kitchen window, and I stood up off the floor, set her phone back on the counter at the same angle it had been at before, and went to the bathroom to wash my face. She knocked. I opened the door. I handed her the phone. I said I hoped she hadn't needed it too badly. She said I was funny. She left. I sat back down on the floor for a while after she was gone. Not because I needed to sit, just because standing felt like more energy than I had. Have you ever found out that something you had felt for years was real, and instead of feeling vindicated, all you felt was exhausted? Drop a yes or no in the comments. I mean that. I want to know. I didn't call her. I want to explain why, because people always ask, and the answer is more specific than it sounds. I didn't call because I was afraid of my own voice. I've spent 6 years in a job that requires precision, requires me to say exactly what something is and exactly what it means, and nothing beyond that. And I knew that if I called my mother that night, with 47 minutes of reading still sitting in my chest, I would not be precise. I would be something else. And I needed to be precise when this happened. I needed it to be clean. So I went to work on Monday. My case that week was a tablet belonging to a man who had filed a fraudulent disability claim, and then posted gym selfies on a Finsta his wife didn't know about. I recovered 11 weeks of deleted posts and a folder of screenshots he had taken of his own post to send to someone I was not supposed to know about. I documented everything. I filed the report. The case was straightforward. I thought while I worked about the fact that people are consistently, almost universally, wrong about what disappears. They delete things and believe the deletion is the end of the thing. They move information out of sight and believe it is therefore gone. They create spaces where certain people aren't included and believe those spaces are permanent and sealed and will never be found by someone who knows where to look. I know where to look. It is the thing I am best at, and the thing that has served me best, and the thing I now understood that my mother had not considered when she left her phone on my kitchen counter on a Sunday afternoon. I thought about what I wanted. That was the question Gina asked me 3 days after I found the chat. Gina works 2 desks down from me. She is 43, twice divorced, and speaks in a register of practical clarity that I find deeply useful. I told her what I had found. The short version, 10 minutes, enough for her to understand the structure of it. She listened without interrupting, which is unusual for her. When I finished, she said, "Okay, what do you want to happen?" I thought about it. I didn't want an apology. I had known by that point that what I wanted was not an apology, because an apology from my mother would be a performance carefully crafted that reframed the situation as a misunderstanding or a well-intentioned mistake, and I would be expected to receive it graciously, and we would all move on, and the group chat would be deleted and replaced with something newer and quieter, and I would be back to sitting at Sunday dinner with the feeling that I was arriving somewhere a moment after everyone else had left. I didn't want that. What I wanted was for my father to know. Not because I thought it would fix anything, not because I had a plan for what came after, but because my father's name had been put on a sentence he had never said, used as a tool to describe his own daughter in a way he had never described her. And he deserved to know that his name had been borrowed and his voice had been faked. And the woman he had been married to for 31 years had done it without, apparently, a moment's hesitation. He deserved to know, and I deserved to be the one to tell him. "Then do that," Gina said. I nodded. "And document everything first," she added in, just in case. I was already documenting. I had started the night I found it. Not because I was planning legal action. I wasn't. But because documentation is the first reflex of someone who has spent 6 years being paid to understand that what exists only in memory is what disappears. I created a folder on my personal laptop. I named it the way I name all my files. Clearly, without editorializing. Family. No Delia. Messages 1 to 847. I screenshotted every message that mattered. I organized them by theme, by date, by person. I spent 4 evenings doing this, quietly, after work, with the coffee maker running and the specific focus of someone who has a task and knows how to do it. Then I waited. My father's birthday was the first Saturday in November. I had 5 weeks. I used those 5 weeks carefully. I did not change how I behaved with my mother. I called her on the same days. I answered her texts. I told her about my week when she asked. I shared nothing real. I had stopped sharing anything real the night I handed her phone back and said I hoped she hadn't needed it too badly. But I maintained the surface of the relationship precisely because I needed her to feel certain. Certain that she was safe. Certain that nothing had changed. I thought about my grandmother during those weeks. My mother's mother, who had died 4 years ago, who had a glass figurine collection on a shelf in her living room that my mother had packed up and taken home without consulting anyone. and which I had not thought about since until I thought about it now and understood it as the first version of the same sentence. I thought about every holiday and every dinner and every phone call where I had come home and felt the room and decided I was imagining it. I thought about my therapist asking what evidence I had. Yeah, I thought about the ornament that wasn't hung. I thought all about my father, who did not build group chats, who texted me about the rain, who called me kid and meant it as a complete sentence. I had one conversation with him in those 5 weeks that I did not plan and did not expect. He called me on a Wednesday evening, not our usual time, not any particular occasion, and said he'd been thinking about me and wanted to know how things were going. We talked for 40 minutes about work and about a hiking trail he wanted to try and about a sports trade he found interesting and thought I would find boring, which I did, but I listened anyway. At the end of the call, he said, "You doing okay? Like, actually." I said I was working through some things, but I was okay. He said, "Good, call me more." I said I would. I thought about that call for a long time afterward. The first Saturday in November was overcast and cool, the kind of day that feels like an exhale after a long season of something. I drove to my parents' house with the folder open on my phone and my phone in my bag and my bag on the passenger seat. And I thought about nothing in particular the whole drive because I had been thinking about it for 5 weeks and there was nothing left to think about that would change what I'd already decided. I got there at 5. Kevin's car was already in the driveway. Pam's boots were by the front door. My mother's voice was in the kitchen telling someone where the serving spoon was. Everything was exactly the same as it had been every year for as long as I could remember. My father was in his chair, college football on the TV, a team he didn't care about, which was how he preferred it. Something to look at without investment. He stood up when I came in, the way he always stood up, and hugged me the way he always hugged me, one arm, quick, solid, and said, "Hey, kid." Said, "Hey." I said, "Happy birthday." He said he didn't feel 59. I said, "Nobody ever does." Kevin was on the couch with his coat still on, which he did every year for the first 20 minutes, as though he might need to leave suddenly. He said, "Hey." I said, "Hey." Pam appeared from the direction of the kitchen, holding a glass of wine, and said it was so good to see me. And she looked exactly the way she always looked, and I said it was good to see her too, and none of the words meant anything at all. My mother came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and she hugged me, and she smelled like the pot roast she had been making, and she said, "I looked tired, or did I need to sleep more? I should take better care of myself." I said, I was fine. She said, "She worried." I said, "I knew." Dinner was the same as it had been every year. Pot roast, potatoes, the green beans my father liked, a store-bought cake from the bakery on Providence Road, white frosting, my father's name written on it in blue cursive by someone who had been writing it for 11 years. My father made the same joke about the candles being a fire hazard. Kevin made the same comment about wishing the cake came with a toy inside. Pam laughed. My mother said, every year, in the tone that meant she found it charming. I ate. I listened. I tracked the way my mother moved through the evening, the way she directed attention, the way she managed the pace of conversation, the way she looked at me sometimes with a warmth that was entirely real and that existed at the same time as 847 messages and did not cancel them out. Both things were true. I held both of them through the pot roast and the potatoes and the green beans and most of the cake. Then my mother did the things she had been doing my whole life. We were sitting at the table after the plates were cleared, coffee in front of the adults, my father with the small glass of bourbon he allowed himself on his birthday. My mother had been telling a story about something at the dental office, and then she shifted, smooth, practiced, the way a current shifts direction in water, and turned to me. She said, Delia, you know your father and I have been thinking about you, and we really feel like I put my phone on the table. I said, before you finish that, I want to read something. My mother stopped. The table was quiet in a way that had weight to it. I opened the folder. I had decided weeks ago where to start, and the decision had not changed. Not the first message, the one about me crying on the phone at 23, because I did not want to begin from a place that could be reframed as sensitivity. I went to message 589. 500. I read it out loud evenly, the way I read documents in professional settings. I was talking to Ron, and honestly, he agrees that Delia needs to figure her own life out. He thinks she's too dependent on us emotionally, and she needs to grow up. I set the phone down. I looked at my father. I said, "Did you say that, Dad?" The table went very still. My father looked at the phone. He picked it up. He read the message himself, which I had not anticipated. And the reading took longer than it should have because I think he read it more than once. Then he set the phone down. Then he looked at my mother. His face was not angry. My father is not a man who leads with anger. His face was something more precise than anger. The expression of a man who has just found his name, signed to something he never agreed to, and who is deciding in real time what that means. He said, "I've never said that, not once, not about you." My mother said, "Ron, it was just, I was paraphrasing. I was trying to." He said, "That's my name in a text message saying I think our daughter needs to grow up." I didn't say that. She said, "You know what I meant. I was just trying to." I read the next message. It was the one about Christmas, about the cousins gathering on December 26th that I hadn't been told about. I read it without commentary, just the words, just the date, just the names. My mother said, "Delia, this is not the time or the place to." I read the next one, the one about therapy, the one she'd shared within 48 hours of me asking her not to. Kevin put his fork down. I read the one about my promotion, the screenshot of my Facebook post with Pam's response about me being sensitive. Pam looked at the table. I read the one about my relationship, the one where Pam had said the new guy had no idea what he was getting into. My Aunt Terry, who was present because she was family and it was a birthday, looked at her coffee with the focused attention of someone who had realized too late that she was in a room where something was happening and had no clean way to be elsewhere. I read 7 more. I had chosen them before I drove over, and I read them in the order I had chosen them, and each one landed in the silence the one before it had made. When I finished, I set the phone face down on the table. My father said, "How long has this existed?" He was looking at my mother. She didn't answer. He said it again quietly. "Sandra, how long?" She said, "It wasn't meant to be something that..." He said, "How long?" She said, "It's not what it looks like." He said, "It looks like a group chat with my family in it that my daughter wasn't part of for 3 years, with my name on things I didn't say. Is that not what it is?" She said, "I was just trying to manage things. You know how things get complicated, and I was just trying to..." I said, "Manage things." Not a question. He repeated it the way you repeat something when you need to hear it again to understand it. The way you repeat something when the words are right, but the meaning is still settling. My mother said, "I did everything for this family, everything. And I needed somewhere to just..." She stopped. Kevin said to the center of the table, "I should have said something. I'm sorry, Del." Pam did not speak. Terry looked up from her coffee for the first time in several minutes. She said, "I should have too." 2 words. She looked at me when she said it, just for a second. Then she looked away. My mother looked at my father, then at me. Her expression was something I had never seen on her face before, and I have thought about it many times since, and I think what it was, the closest I could get to naming it, was the expression of someone who has known for a long time that a particular day was coming and has spent years not thinking about it and is now standing in it and finding it both worse and more familiar than she expected. She said, I just needed somewhere that was mine." That was the most honest thing she said all night. I didn't respond to it. Not because I didn't have anything to say. I had a great deal to say. But because there was nothing I could say that would be more clarifying than the silence that followed it. My father looked at me. He said, "I'm sorry, kid." To me, not to the table, not to the room. He said it while looking at me, and he meant it in the specific way he means things, which is completely and without performance. I said, "I know, Dad." He nodded. Then he looked at the remaining slice of birthday cake on the plate in the center of the table, and he said, "I'm going to have the rest of that cake." He cut himself a piece. I laughed. I hadn't planned to. It came out of somewhere that had been clenched tight for 5 weeks, and the laugh surprised both of us. And he looked up at me, and something in his face settled, like not loosening. My mother stood up. She picked up her coffee cup and walked to the kitchen. She did not storm out. She did not slam anything. She just left the table and went to the kitchen, and we heard her running water and moving things and being quiet in the way she is quiet when she is deciding what version of things will be presented when she comes back. She did not come back to the table. Kevin and I sat with my father while he finished the cake. Nobody spoke very much. There was not very much to say that was the right size for the room. At some point, Pam said she thought they should probably head out, and Kevin said, yeah, and they got their coats, and they left, and Kevin hugged me at the door in a way he had not hugged me in a long time, and I let him, and I didn't say anything, and neither did he. I left at 9:30. If you have ever had to sit at a table with people who have been talking about you and read their words back to them, drop a comment. I think more people have done this than will ever say it in public. I want you to know I see you. I drove home on the highway with the windows cracked, even though it was cold, because I needed the air. I did not feel the way I had imagined feeling. I want to say that plainly because I think people expect a certain ending to a story like this. A clean release, a sense of completion, the satisfying weight of a door closing on something that needed to close. I had imagined something like that. I had spent 5 weeks building towards something like that. What I actually felt, driving home on the highway with cold air coming through the window, was something much quieter and stranger. Yeah, I felt the specific tiredness that comes after something you have been bracing against for a long time finally happens, and your body does not know what to do with the energy it had been holding for the impact. I felt the ache of someone who has just confirmed something they had been hoping was wrong. I had been right. I had been right for 3 years, and being right about this particular thing was not a victory. It was just the truth, sitting there, heavier than I had expected. I made tea when I got home that I didn't drink. I sat on my couch and looked at my apartment, the couch I had saved for, the coffee maker that cost more than it should, the bookshelf I had arranged 3 times before it felt right. And I thought about the fact that this space was mine, in a way that the space I had grown up in had apparently never quite been. My mother called 4 days later. I let it go to voicemail. She said she wanted to explain. Her voice was careful in the way it gets when she's building something, and I could hear the structure of the explanation before she'd finished giving it. The reframing, the context, the well-intentioned mistakes that were really just her trying to manage a complicated family. I listened to it twice. Then I put my phone down and went to make coffee. I have not called her back. It has been several weeks. I don't know when I will. I'm not closing that door. I genuinely am not. But I am not standing in front of it, ready to open it either. There's a difference between being closed and not being ready, and I am trying to be honest with myself about which one this is. My father texted me the Sunday after the dinner. He said, "Thinking of you, kid, call me sometime." I called him that afternoon. We talked for an hour and 23 minutes. He asked about my cases. He asked about a hike he was considering. He said something practical about a problem I was having at work that turned out to be exactly right. At the end of the call, he said, "Same time next week." time next? I said yes. Kevin texted me 3 weeks after the dinner. Like he said, I'm sorry, Del. I should have said something a long time ago. Like, I read it twice and have not yet found the words I want to respond with. What I want to say and what I have language for are not the same thing yet. So I'm waiting for them to meet. Pam has not contacted me. I did not expect her to, and I hold no specific feeling about it either way. Terry sent a card, actual card, in an envelope with a stamp. She wrote 3 sentences. The last one said, I knew it was wrong and I didn't do anything and I'm sorry. I put the card on my kitchen counter and have moved it twice and put it back. I deleted the folder from my laptop the week after the dinner. Every screenshot, every organized category, every documented message from every documented day. Not because the information had stopped being true, just because I had done the one thing I had needed to do with it, and keeping it would mean something I was not willing to mean. That I was still gathering evidence on people I was still hoping to convict. I am not trying to convict anyone. I am trying to figure out what a family looks like when the architecture that held it together turns out to have been built around someone's absence. One morning in December, I woke up and checked my phone before I got out of bed, the bad habit I have never managed to break, and I noticed that I was checking for a specific thing without having consciously decided to check for it. The good morning text. The thinking of you message my mother had sent every morning for years without fail, that I had screenshot and saved because she was not a woman who showed affection easily, and each one of those messages had felt like a version of her saying something she didn't know how to say in person. There wasn't one. There hasn't been one since November. I put my phone down. I got up and made coffee. I thought about the screenshots I had saved, the folder of them, organized by year that I had kept on my phone because I had thought they were proof of something. I opened the folder. I looked at them for a while. Then I deleted the folder. Not because the messages hadn't been real. They had been real. She had sent them every morning, and she had meant something by them. Whatever that something was. But I had been saving them like evidence. Like proof that she cared in a way I couldn't otherwise demonstrate. And I understood now that I did not need to prove that. I did not need to build a case for my own mother's love. Either it would show up in a form I didn't need to document or it wouldn't. And either way, I was going to be okay. I was going to be okay. I have said that to myself every day since November with decreasing effort. At first, it was something I was telling myself to make it true. Now it is something I am noticing is already true. My apartment is still mine. The coffee is still worth what it cost. The couch is still the right couch. My father calls me on Sundays now. Every Sunday, without fail, somewhere between 4 and 4:30, he asks about my week and says practical things that sometimes turn out to be exactly right, and calls me kid at the beginning and end of every call. Last Sunday, he told me about a hiking trail he had finally tried and described the view in the patient, specific way he describes things he is genuinely trying to share. I listened to every word. Thank you for staying with me through all of this. I know it was long. I know 20 minutes of someone's attention is not nothing, and I never forget that. If any part of this story felt like something you have lived, if you have ever been the person who was not in the room where the real conversation was happening, I want to hear about it. You don't have to share details. I just want to know, did you ever find out? And when you did, what did you do next? For anyone who recognized something in this story that they have never said out loud, I see you. You are not imagining it, and you are allowed to find out. New story every Wednesday. I'll see you then. The events in this story are inspired by real experiences shared across online communities and adapted for audio storytelling. Names, identifying details, and circumstances have been changed or fictionalized. This content is for entertainment and storytelling purposes only. Any resemblance to specific living persons is coincidental. Viewer discretion is advised.